I never thought a 2-minute phone call could alter the trajectory of my entire life. It was a Tuesday, the morning sun just barely caressing the vibrant geraniums on my windowsill, when Brian called. My son. My only child. I immediately sensed his tension, that familiar tightness in his voice that always signaled a request was imminent. Mom, could you send us $500 this week? Mason broke his phone again, and Kelly says he can't study without one. I feigned surprise, a well-rehearsed act. Of course, dear, I told him, promising to transfer the funds before noon, just as always. It was routine. But when he hung up, he didn't quite disconnect. I heard the faint hum, that peculiar pause only a phone makes when a call remains open, a silent portal. And then, I heard it. Kelly's laughter. First light, then mocking, then Brian's voice. That voice that once so gently lulled me to sleep as a baby, now twisted into something bitter and unrecognizable. I swear she's so stupid, she still thinks we visit her out of affection. Mom, the ATM unlimited withdrawals. Their words struck me like a slamming door, a brutal, unforgiving blow. And Mason, my grandson, my precious Mason, joined in without hesitation. Just give her any excuse, and she'll hand over the cash. The old lady lives to feel useful. All three of them. They laughed. They all laughed. I remained seated, the phone still pressed to my ear, feeling my heart slowly dissolve, like a sugar cube under water. Did they truly believe I would stay silent, meekly accepting this humiliation? My hand trembled, not from fear, but from a profound coldness that rose from my stomach, spreading through my veins. I stood up slowly, cautiously, like one trying not to disturb a nest of vipers. I walked toward the living room shelf, the one where I kept my hand-labeled herb jars, linden, chamomile, mint. I picked one, not even knowing which herb I sought to calm myself. It was futile. The tea infuser slipped from my grasp, falling to the floor with a hollow clink, like me. Hollow. Me, who had given everything. 30 years I'd lived in this house, every piece of furniture, every faint stain on the carpet held a story. Brian learned to walk beside that very sofa. Kelly used my bathroom mirror to apply her makeup before every job interview. And Mason, dear God, Mason. He spent entire summers here. Now. I moved to my desk, pulling out the folder where I kept my bank receipts. The last check I'd sent was just 4 days ago. For school emergencies, Kelly had said. Emergencies. And me? Was I not the emergency? I sank into the rocking chair by the window. The sun was high now, shining as brightly as ever, but nothing, absolutely nothing, was the same. I didn't cry. Not yet. The tears came later, like an ill-mannered guest who arrives unannounced, long after the damage is done. Before I became the family ATM, the limitless withdrawal, I was so much more. There was a time when my house smelled of melted butter and old paper, comforting scents that spoke of warmth and home. My days began with percolated coffee and the cheerful sound of children laughing on the sidewalk. I was Miss Linda, the neighborhood school librarian, the one who read stories with a theatrical flair and knitted sweaters for teachers' babies. When Brian was a child, he'd stay with me at the library until closing. He was 6 when I taught him the Dewey Decimal System. 7, when he told me he wanted to be an astronaut. Every Saturday, I'd bake him oatmeal raisin cookies and hide little notes in his lunchbox, "I'm proud of you." At 13, he suffered a terrible bout of pneumonia. I slept for 2 weeks in a hospital chair, reading aloud from the adventures of Tom Sawyer until his fever broke. I never left his side, not for a single night. When his father, my Thomas, died of a sudden heart attack at 44, I found myself alone with a high school boy, a life insurance policy that barely covered the funeral, and a mortgage that haunted my sleep. And still, I raised Brian. I took a second job as a night archivist at the Central Library, barely sleeping, surviving on coffee and crumbs of hope. When it was time for college, I didn't hesitate. I sold Thomas's engagement ring, that white gold band with the blue stone his grandmother brought from Scotland. Brian never knew. He only knew his tuition was covered. And when he met Kelly, I was all smiles. I opened my door to her with a peach pie, treating her like my own daughter. She'd say her own mother was too critical, that with me she felt at home. It moved me, truly. I never imagined that years later, I would hear her call me the gullible old lady. When Mason was born, I was there. I took an extended leave from work just to help them. I changed diapers, prepared baby food, soothed fevers, and sang lullabies. I can't count the times I postponed my own medical checkups to stay with Mason when he had a runny nose, or the nights I baked school cupcakes when Kelly claimed to be too exhausted. And yes, there was the other thing. When they wanted to buy their house, they didn't qualify for the loan. So I, like a happy fool, refinanced mine. $40,000. We'll pay you back in less than a year, Mom. It's just a jump start. They never paid me back. Not a dollar. Not even a thank you. I kept telling myself, it's family, Linda. You give without expecting. But giving without expecting isn't the same as being invisible. Sometimes I sit in my kitchen, the one with the sky blue tiles Thomas chose, and I wonder when everything began to change. Maybe it was when Kelly stopped inviting me to birthdays and just sent me the gift list via text. Or when Mason, at 14, corrected me disdainfully, "It's not Nintendo, Grandma, it's Switch." You don't even know. My heart still held on to hope, but my body already knew. I felt it in my arthritic hands when I cooked for them without them ever sitting down at the table. I felt it in my back when I carried their bags while they walked past me, rushing inside. I was a mother, a grandmother, a caretaker. I was the glue. And yet, today, I realize I was the only one trying to hold the pieces together. Now, the house is too quiet. Some mornings, I just sit on my bed, listening to the tick of the wall clock Thomas and I bought for our 15th anniversary. Tick. 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 Each second resonates like a drop of what I no longer possess. My birthday was last month. 74 years old. Brian didn't call. Mason didn't call. Kelly did send a text, 4 words, "Happy birthday." No news. Like signing an invoice. I still sent them cards for their birthdays, always with a bill inside, "For your books, Mason." "For a treat, Brian." "For a coffee, Kelly." Even though I knew they wouldn't read them. Sometimes I cook like I used to, out of habit. Last week, I made a lemon cake, their favorite, and took it to their house, still warm, wrapped in a towel. I found a note on the door, "We're not here. Leave whatever it is in the mailbox." Whatever it is. I left the cake and never knew if they ate it. They didn't return the pan either. I've become a shadow that brings food and leaves. A woman who sends money as if that could buy affection. And I realize, with a tightening in my soul, that I've been trying to buy love with checks for years. On Sundays, I used to dress in my best blouse and wait for their visit like one awaits a miracle. Now, I only dress up just in case they ring the doorbell. Helen, my neighbor, sees me from her garden sometimes. She waves with her coffee cup in hand. I smile back, but without showing my teeth. I'm not ashamed of my loneliness, but I am ashamed of how I fed it. I have a photo album open on my living room table, right on the page of Mason's first day of school. Me, crouching down with my hands on his shoulders, him, 5 years old, with his dinosaur lunchbox. I remember he cried when he entered the classroom. I stayed all day in the hallway, just in case he wanted to come out. Now, when I text him, he only responds with emojis. The silence has taught me things that habit had hidden. Like that moment when you stop wondering why they don't call, and you start wondering why you keep calling. I've gotten used to eating alone. Sometimes I set 2 place settings anyway, as if the act of doing so could conjure company. It doesn't, of course, but it calms the anxiety of the empty place settings. My nights are long. I sit on the sofa with my chamomile tea, the one that always helped me sleep. Sometimes I twirl my wedding ring, now loose on my finger, not from thinness, but from loss. Love, when it cools, also shrinks. In the drawers, I have Mason's crayon drawings. One says, "Grandma, I love you to the sun." Now he doesn't even respond to my messages. I used to think that if I gave more, they would want to stay. But it turns out, giving without limits only teaches others to leave without guilt. Now I know. The first signs were always there. They were small, like invisible cracks in a favorite mug. A careless word, a fleeting glance, an oversight that hurt more than it should. I remember a Tuesday afternoon in March, not so long ago, when Brian called, his voice hurried. "Mom, I need you to transfer $1,200 today. It's for Mason. He needs a laptop for school." Without question, I said yes. Not because I didn't suspect something was wrong, but because my impulse was always the same, to fix it. But that same night, while searching for my purse to get my card, I accidentally opened a voice message forwarded by Kelly. "Don't worry," her voice chirped, "we'll tell her it's for Mason. She'll fall for it hook, line, and sinker." I stared at the screen as if my eyes could change the content of the message. I listened to it 3 times. 3 times. Rage settled behind my molars, mute but vibrating. But I said nothing. Not then, not later. I thought, perhaps it was a misunderstanding? That single perhaps cost me thousands of dollars over the years. Another day, I was in line at the bank and saw a Venmo request, $50 for dinner with friends, from Mason. At first, I smiled. I thought it was sweet that he considered me. But when I texted him to ask how it went, he didn't reply. Not a thank you, not even an emoji. And when I called him, he answered with a dry voice, "Grandma, it's not a big deal. It was just something between friends. Why does everything have to be so serious with you?" He hung up without waiting for an answer. Again. Then Kelly called me, crying, saying her mother was sick, that they didn't know how to pay for a night nurse. It churned my stomach because Kelly's mother never liked me. She once said my house smelled like old people's soup. But I transferred what I could anyway. 2 weeks later, I saw them on Instagram. Dinner at an expensive restaurant. Mason posed with a sushi platter larger than his head. The caption read, "My queen deserves the best #nightout #grateful. Grateful." It took me days to gather the courage, but one Sunday afternoon, I asked Brian if everything was okay with Kelly's mom. He replied without looking up from the TV. "Oh, that's better now. Don't worry." As if I were an automatic account that didn't need explanations, just vague reasons. I started keeping a record, not of numbers, I had those online, but of attitudes. Every slight, every excuse, every unspoken word that weighed more than a slammed door. Brian no longer called to tell me about his life, he only called when a bill was due. Kelly avoided my eyes at family gatherings. Mason hadn't texted me since last year, except for payment requests. And I was still there, with my notepad and my faith intact, noting every broken promise like someone still believing in fairy tales. My neighbor, Helen, with her unvarnished honesty, blurted out one day while we were pruning roses, "Linda, if every time someone calls you it's to ask for something, when was the last time they asked how you are?" I didn't know how to answer. The signs were there, but one doesn't want to admit they're being used. It's easier to think there's still some affection left under all that interest. But I'm no longer the same woman who baked cookies to beg for attention. I'm starting to see, and what I see, I don't like at all. Mason's graduation day began at 5 o'clock in the morning. I woke to the chirping of robins outside, just like every spring. I brewed strong coffee, not the decaf of my sleepless nights, and checked the cake box for the 5th time. It was his favorite, red velvet with cream cheese frosting, topped with fresh strawberries. I made it every year for his birthday, but this time was special. His high school graduation. One of a kind. I drove 2 hours, crossing states. I stopped at a coffee shop to use the restroom, checking the cake with every bump in the road, as if it carried a crown. I arrived at the auditorium 20 minutes before the ceremony. The sun was high, and I felt silly for wearing a sweater. I looked for their names on the guest list. Mine wasn't there. Don't worry, ma'am, the young usherette said, you can sit over there, by the emergency exit. The last row. From there, you could barely see the caps, but I stayed, because that's what grandmothers do. They stay. After the ceremony, the students poured out, laughing, hugging. I held the cake as if it were a sacred offering. I saw Mason. He was with his group, taking photos with a drone, laughing with friends. When I approached, his expression changed. Grandma, we didn't know you'd come. Kelly was beside him. She feigned a smile, but didn't bother to hide her annoyance. We didn't see you on the list, she said, as if that justified everything. It doesn't matter, I murmured. I brought something for you. I held out the cake. Mason looked at it, took it with one hand. Oh, thanks. He was already turning to go back to his group when I placed my other hand on his shoulder. And this is for you too. I pulled out a white envelope. Inside was a check for $1,000. For whatever you need, sweetheart. Start this new chapter without worries. His gaze lingered for a second. Thanks, Grandma. But he said it like one says, pass the salt. Kelly approached quickly and took the envelope without pretense. We'll put it in his account today. And that was it. Not a photo with me. Not a let's go to dinner together. Just a hollow thanks and their backs. I stood there, by the parking lot dumpster, watching other grandparents pose for photos, holding bouquets of flowers, receiving hugs. All I had left was the empty cake pan and the echo of the coldest thanks I'd ever heard. I drove back in silence. No radio, no calls. Just the hum of the car and the internal whisper that was beginning to change its tone. Before, it would say, hang in there, Linda, they're just busy. That night, for the first time, it said, this isn't love. This is usage. I got into the shower with my clothes still on. The hot water couldn't melt the ice in my chest. I looked at my hands, these hands that once held him when he had a fever, that kneaded his first banana bread, that knitted his baby blanket. All for this? I didn't cry. Not that night. I just fell asleep with my wedding ring in my hand and my soul in tatters. That night, I listened to the call again. Not by accident. Not because the phone was still connected. This time, I deliberately found it in my call history. There it was, Brian, for 17 a.m. 2 minutes. I played the audio. I sat in the rocking chair and listened to it all again. She believed it, Brian said, laughing. Kelly let out a nasal chuckle. The poor thing thinks she still matters. And then Mason. Mason. The old lady gets excited about anything. We tell her we love you and she just hands over another check. More laughter. As if affection were bait. As if I were a fool collecting crumbs in the hope that someday I'd be invited to the table. I played it again. Because sometimes, a wound needs to hit rock bottom to begin healing. A third time. Kelly's mocking voice, you just have to smile, smile, and sign the envelope. Brian, it's easier than asking for a loan. A fourth time. My rage vibrated behind my molars. I rubbed my arthritic thumb, the one that used to ache when the weather changed. This time, it ached even though it was warm. What had I been to them? A mother? A grandmother? An ATM with a sweet voice? I closed my eyes and allowed myself to feel everything, the contempt, the humiliation, the shame of having deceived myself for so long. I saw my reflection in the dark window pane. Not the Linda who baked cookies. Not the one who read stories with voices. Not the one who refinanced her house. I saw a woman who had been invisible in her own family. And I understood it in a flash, it wasn't that they no longer loved me, it was that they never knew how. I got up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I went to the desk drawer, pulled out a blue folder. In it, I had all the transfer confirmations, the receipts, the cashed checks. Let's count, I whispered. 1, 2, 3 times, to be sure. $75,432. 85 years. Over $9,000 a year. Almost $800 a month. A rent. A life. My retirement. And not a single word of thanks. I took the folder and placed it on the table, right next to the photo of Mason in his graduation gown. I looked at it for a long time, then turned it face down. I didn't want to see that fake smile. Not after what I'd heard. The recording was still available. I could have forwarded it. I could have confronted them with proof, with rage, with all the contained pain. But I didn't. I didn't need them to apologize. I didn't need them to lie again. I just needed to get out of there. Out of that role. It was time to become someone else. Not for them. For me. I didn't make a scene. I didn't cry in front of them. I didn't send messages or launch accusations. I got up that morning as usual, lemon tea in hand, cotton robe on. But inside me, something was no longer in its place. Or rather, something had finally settled into its rightful place. I went straight to the hallway cabinet. There, I kept Thomas's old ledger. It had never stopped being used, though now only I touched it. On one page, I wrote in large black ink, last check, yesterday's date. Amount, $X beneficiary, disloyalty. I closed it with a click that sounded like a final period. And I set about my business. First, I opened the family chat. The one with the insipid memes, the gift lists, and the empty messages. I tapped the exit group button. The system asked if I was sure. I smiled. I'd never been more certain. Then I logged into the bank app. I had 2 joint accounts, one with Brian, another that Kelly used for easier transfers to me. I closed both. Then I called my manager in person. I asked him to revoke all authorizations that weren't exclusively mine. I set up additional key alerts, notifications for every movement. Would you like to assign beneficiaries? Not yet, I told him. First, I need to clean house. I cut off their access like one cuts off oxygen to a parasite. Back home, I went to the guest bedroom, the one I once decorated for Mason. They used to sleep there when they didn't have time to drive back. Now, all that remained were a wrinkled quilt and a box of old magazines. I opened the box. I found a framed photo of Brian and me as a child, both covered in flour. I held it in my hands. For a moment, I thought about keeping it. But no. I placed it delicately inside a brown paper bag, along with some books I'd lent them and they'd never returned. I took the bag to the car, left it on their porch without ringing the doorbell. They didn't deserve a note. Back in my kitchen, I prepared something different. Not a dinner for others. Not a dedicated cake. A hot bowl of lentil soup with cornbread, just for me. I sat in my chair by the window with my crossword puzzle book and took the first bite with still trembling hands. It was freedom. Warm. Simple. Salty. It tasted like a beginning. And for the first time in years, I fell asleep without my cell phone on the nightstand, because that night, I wasn't expecting calls. And I didn't need them. I woke up in a bed that wasn't mine. The lamp had a warm bulb, one of those that makes everything look less sad. The blanket was rough, but clean, and the air smelled of dry chlorine and disinfectant. A roadside motel. Nothing fancy, but it was enough. I had left without a word. I locked up the house, packed a couple of changes of clothes, and hit the road with no clear destination. I just knew I didn't want to be where I had always been used. That night, as I turned off the light, tears surprised me. It wasn't a scandalous sob, it was a slow, sticky sigh, the kind that comes when you can no longer maintain the facade. Was it all a lie? That question spun in my mind like a broken propeller. I saw myself at Christmas, wrapping gifts with golden ribbon, waiting for their arrival, which was always a little late. At every graduation, every doctor's appointment, every carefully packed lunchbox. All for people who saw me as a useful burden. I curled up in bed, clutching the wool scarf I'd knitted one winter for Mason to my chest. It still smelled like him. I remembered how he used to laugh when I made character voices, how he'd hold my hand with those sticky little fingers, and I wondered if all of that had disappeared, or if it simply never mattered. I didn't sleep much. I woke before dawn, my bones stiff from the cheap mattress. I made myself coffee in the lobby machine, that plastic taste I didn't bother to sweeten. I carried a notebook in my bag. Thomas taught me that when your head hurts, writing releases the pressure. So I wrote. Brian asked me for money for the first time when Mason was 3. Kelly asked me to pay for kindergarten. I refinanced the house in 2014. I wrote and wrote, filling pages with figures, years, reasons. A chronology of polite oblivion. A log of how a mother slowly parceled out her retirement in exchange for crumbs. At the end of the notebook, I tallied the sum, $75,432.19. I stared at that number, not for the amount, but for what it represented. It wasn't just dollars, it was the price of the dignity I gave away, the cost of repeated hope, the exact amount I was paid for being useful but not loved. I sat by the motel window with my stale coffee, watching cars pass, and told myself, this does not repeat. This breaks here. Because if a mother doesn't protect herself from those who claim to love her, then who will? I returned home 2 days later. Not out of nostalgia. Not for reconciliation. I returned because I needed to see everything one last time, with new eyes. I entered, and the silence hit me with a different kind of coldness. It was no longer loneliness, it was clarity. I took off my shoes, left my keys on the empty fruit bowl, and sat at the table with the leather briefcase where I kept important papers. I began to sort, receipts, checks, transfers, loans that were never repaid, payments they swore will reimburse you as soon as things settle down. There were plane tickets I bought when Kelly forgot it was their anniversary. Laptops, camps, school uniforms, even the professional photography package for Mason's yearbook. I paid for everything without asking, without expecting anything more than a smile. And yet, the smiles had also become scarce. I opened online banking and started digging through the last 8 years. The numbers spoke to me like never before, dates, amounts, descriptions. It was a museum of abuse disguised as help. There were the times I transferred money to Mason on a Friday night, and the next day, I'd see him with new shoes on Instagram. There were the $200 monthly payments I sent for 5 years to cover therapies that never existed. I realized the pattern was clearer than the paper of the invoices. They gave excuses, I solved. They kept silent. And when they weren't silent, they lied. Not once. Not by mistake. But systematically. A system I myself helped to build. It was then that I truly understood. I wasn't just a victim of their disinterest, I was an accomplice to my own exploitation. Because every time I made an excuse instead of setting a limit, I taught them to ask for more. Every time I tolerated their apathy with a smile, I confirmed that I was there to give. Always to give. I didn't put a price on my time or my love, so they didn't either. I got up from the chair, took my mother's hand mirror, the one with the tortoise-shell handle, and looked at myself intently. Linda, I told myself softly, this is no longer sadness. This is awakening. It wasn't about revenge or getting an apology. It was about reclaiming something I thought lost forever, my worth. Because it's one thing to give out of love, and quite another to give out of fear of being forgotten. And I was no longer afraid. Helen showed up the next morning without warning, as she always did when she sensed something was wrong. She carried a pot of barley soup with vegetables, wrapped in a checkered cloth that smelled of bay leaf and home. I have extra, she said, knowing perfectly well that I hadn't cooked anything in days. She made me sit down and served the plates as if we were in the old days, when we took turns bringing desserts to school or babysitting each other's children. She didn't ask immediately, she just looked at me with those crinkled eyes that had seen me fall more than once. She waited until I took the first spoonful. Then she said, in a calm voice, without drama, How long has it been since you cried in front of someone? I couldn't help it. The spoon trembled in my fingers. The steam from the soup mingled with the knot in my throat. I heard it, Helen, I said, my voice barely a whisper. All three of them. Brian, Kelly, and Mason. Talking about me like I was an ATM laughing. She didn't frown. She wasn't scandalized. She just nodded once, slowly, with pity, but without surprise. I always told you, she said. But it's not the same to know it as to hear it. I rested my elbows on the table and covered my face. I felt her gnarled fingers on my wrist, her thumb rubbing in small circles, a simple gesture, an anchor. I thought it was love, I said, my voice raspy. Helen sighed. Of course you thought that, dear, because you do know how to love. I told her everything, the loans, the fabricated laptop, the graduation cake, the folder of papers, the $75,432.85. Helen didn't interrupt. She just listened with the patience of someone who had seen her friend turn the other cheek for decades. When I finished, she handed me a napkin and said, Linda, you're not crazy, and you're not exaggerating. You're just seeing with your eyes open for the first time. Her words were balm and slap at the same time. Because she was right. I wasn't losing my family, I was losing the fantasy that I ever truly had one. That night, I went to bed with my phone off. Helen left a flashlight by my bed, just in case the power went out, and a package of crackers, in case I woke up nauseous from so much truth. And for the first time in many weeks, I slept soundly, without jolts, without expecting a message, without checking the mailbox, without justifying anyone. Because now I knew I wasn't alone. Just in bad company. The first thing I did was look for the will. It was kept in the safe, next to photos of my wedding, my librarian diploma, and the hospital bracelet Mason wore when he was born. That document, drafted over a decade ago, still stated that everything I owned would pass to Brian. Just in case something happens to me, he had said then, so he can take care of things. But now, seeing it there, with his name written as the sole heir, it made me nauseous. Take care of what? Of continuing to charge me until the very end? I put on my reading glasses, took out a pen, and marked that will with a single word in red, null. The next morning, I went to the law firm where Thomas and I had once gone to draft a power of attorney. The secretary greeted me with that "we haven't seen you in years" smile. I told her I wanted to speak to someone about a new will. Not for later, I clarified, for now. I was assigned a young lawyer, hair pulled back, firm gaze. I told her everything, without tears, without pause. When I finished, she asked me, and do you have someone in mind to leave your estate to? Not my son, I said with a voice that surprised me with its certainty. My husband was killed by stress. My grandson forgets me. But the library to which I dedicated my life still has leaks. The lawyer looked at me in silence, then smiled. Then we're going to create something that endures. That's how the Thomas Fernandez Scholarship was born, a fund for underprivileged young people, especially older women who wanted to finish their studies. My name wouldn't be on the announcements, it wasn't necessary. But at the bottom of every acceptance letter, a note would read, "Thanks to a woman who believed in books and second chances." And for the first time, my money would do something without anyone lying to me to get it. Then I went to the bank. I asked to freeze all joint accounts, cancel secondary cards, and open a new account solely in my name at another branch. The manager looked at me with raised eyebrows. All this at once, Mrs. Linda? Do you know what's happening? I used to give permission without knowing to whom, I told him, adjusting my purse. That's over. I showed him the list of suspicious movements, the transfers, the dates. Do you know what this is? I asked him. A woman waking up. That night, I wrote a letter. Not to send it. To read it aloud and then burn it. Brian, I'm no longer the mother who says yes because she's afraid of being alone. You taught me my worth by putting it on discount. Kelly, you were never my daughter. Mason, you were my son, but even the sun can turn into a shadow if it's not cared for. From now on, the door is closed. Not with a lock. With dignity. I burned it in the kitchen sink. The ashes went down the drain, along with years of accumulated silences. The plan was made, and I, finally, was too. The phone began to ring 3 days later. First it was Brian. The number didn't show up as usual, he had changed something, perhaps a new number or a borrowed phone. But the voice was still the same. "Mom, are you okay? I got a bank alert, something about restricted access. Must be a mistake. Call me as soon as you can." I didn't respond. Because the mistakes, I had already made them for years. Then came Kelly, a voice message this time, choppy, a forced, tearful voice. "Linda, we're sorry. Something we said was misunderstood. Sometimes you say silly things, just joking. We love you very much. Could you please answer?" I sat, twirling my wedding ring on my finger. I remembered when she used to say I was the best mother-in-law in the world. The same one who left me in the last row of the graduation. And then Mason, a simple text, "Grandma, what's going on? Dad and Mom are weird. I just want to know if you're okay." That was the one that hurt. Because for an instant, it tempted me. For a second, I thought about responding with an "I'm okay, sweetheart." But I didn't. Because okay was not repeating the cycle. And Mason was no longer a child. If his love depended on the money I gave him, then it wasn't love. It was habit. And habits, like wills, can be changed. That night, Helen came with a bottle of cider to celebrate that you didn't give them the satisfaction of an explanation, she said, clinking a plastic cup. We laughed like we hadn't in years. We served ourselves hot soup and played Scrabble until midnight. When Helen left, I looked at the closed door and didn't feel lonely. I felt peace. The fourth day was different. The doorbell rang loudly twice, and then a voice I knew well. "Mom, I know you're in there. I just want to talk." It was Brian. I saw him through the peephole. His hair was disheveled, like when he was a child and ran through the house after a nap. I didn't open the door. I didn't speak. I just leaned against the door, my back straight, and listened to him say, in a tense tone, "I know you did something with the will, and about the scholarship. Seriously, Mom, are you going to give everything to strangers?" That's what he chose to tell me. Not "I miss you." Not "I failed you." Just that. Strangers. He didn't know that those young people would be more mine than he ever was. Because they never asked me for anything, and I decided to give them everything. The fifth day, everything was silent. And I knew they had finally let me go. Or maybe it was I who had let go first. 3 months passed. 3 months without calls, without messages, without "we need to talk." The emptiness was deafening at first, then it became soft music. I dedicated myself to things I used to put off for when I had time. I painted the garden fence. I changed the curtains in the guest room. I learned to bake bread without a machine. And every night, I wrote a phrase in my diary, "Today, I didn't regret it either." But then, one Saturday morning, I saw it. A car parked in front of my house. The same color, the same license plates. And then, the soft rap of knuckles on my door. It took me a second to breathe. Another to smooth my blouse. I opened it. There was Brian. Thinner, with dark circles under his eyes, his shoulders slumped. But his eyes still held that flicker of wounded pride. "Mom," his name and his voice no longer sounded familiar. We stood there, facing each other, the threshold between us. "I haven't come to fight," he said. Just to understand." I said nothing. I waited. He looked down, uncomfortable. "You really cut off your family like that?" I looked up, directly. "You cut me off when you decided I was only worth what I gave." "It was a mistake," he said quickly. "A bad joke." We didn't know you were on the line. Ah, right. I crossed my arms. If you hadn't heard me, everything would still be the same. He looked at me, swallowed. I just want things to go back to how they were. I tilted my head gently. Before you called me an ATM? Before the lies, the deception, the laughter behind my back? Brian threw his hands up in frustration. You're my mother. You have to understand that we were stressed. And you, I told him, with icy calm, have to understand that I am not for sale. Silence. He took a deep breath, as if still expecting me to hug him, forgive him, offer him warm soup and a check. But I didn't. I had learned something, Brian. That sometimes you have to close the door to stop bleeding. He put a hand on the doorframe as if to stop me. Mom, I taught you what love was, I told him. And you taught me how much I was worth to you. Thank you for that lesson. And I closed the door. Without screams. Without tears. Just a soft, definitive click. I leaned against the wood and exhaled. It wasn't joy. It wasn't triumph. It was dignity. And that, my dear, is priceless.